Good evening and welcome to the report with me, John Rees. Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch have issued a damning report on Australia's treatment of asylum seekers. Tonight we report on its accusation that the system ignores abuse carried out in its detention centres. We'll also be looking at the Syrian city of Aleppo as a rebel offensive is trying to break a government siege. But first, activist and chief editor of Islam 21C, Dr. Salman is taking legal action against the Home Secretary after he was named in a government press release as holding views contrary to British values. Dr. Butt is also challenging the Home Office's Prevent agenda, claiming it fundamentally breaches freedom of speech and other human rights legislation. Our reporter, Khadija Ahmed, has this.
Dr. Salman Butt's legal case against the UK government is the first legal challenge of its kind and directly questions the government's stated policy of clamping down on what it is defined as non-violent extremism. By taking legal action, Dr. Salman is also challenging the Home Office Prevent agenda, claiming it fundamentally breaches free speech and other human rights. Essentially, the government's being held to account for its entire counter-extremism strategy, which could force Downing Street to have a serious rethink about its policy, if the case is upheld. Islam in the 21st century gets 100,000 visitors a month. The Home Office claimed Dr. Salman used the website to violate British values, therefore labelling him as a non-violent extremist. It was suggested in a Downing Street press release in September last year that Dr. Butt, along with 5 other speakers, had expressed views contrary to British values and suggested that they should be prevented from public speaking, particularly in universities. This came as former Prime Minister David Cameron sought to bar what he termed hate preachers from college campuses during the launch of his extremism task force. It transpires that the information on Dr. Butt was supplied by a right-wing think tank called Henry Jackson Society to the government's shadow extremism unit. Henry Jackson Society's communications officer has told Islam Channel that he was not prepared to comment on the ongoing legal case and declined to say anything further. In the judicial review case, the court has found that there is an arguable case on behalf of Dr. Salman Butt. Dr. Salman Butt said,
"My aim for this case is to force decisions governments make in private of who are extremists to come out and see transparency in the courts. I want people who have been labelled with this smear of extremism to be able to tell why they are labelled as such and to challenge that. It sets a very dangerous precedence to arbitrarily label someone an extremist."
Permission has been granted by Mr. Justice Ousley for Dr. Salman to challenge the Secretary of State for the Home Department on the following points.
That the prevent duty guidance issued to higher education institutions is flawed because it conflicts with the right of speech, which is enshrined in the Education Act for higher education institutions. 2. That the information collected about Dr. Butt by the Extremism Analyst Unit of the Home Office is in breach of the Data Protection Act, and also the procedure for identifying people as extremists is flawed and in breach of the law and the rules of natural justice. 3. Dr. Butt issued judicial review proceedings on the above grounds. He also argued that the words used in the press release from the Prime Minister's office, dated 17 September 2015, were defamatory.
Dr. Butt recently said,
"I'm very grateful to the judge, Mr. Justice Ousley, for granting permission to take my case forward to a full hearing. Many people will be eager to see the hidden and murky process by which individuals are tarnished with the label of extremist, so that these issues are forced into the open and to the scrutiny of the courts."
Although this challenge is the first to tackle the government's definitions of extremism and its policy, its outcome later this year will be keenly watched by activists, human rights groups, and indeed the Muslim community. The case highlights the difficulties that the British government continue to face in turning policy into legislation. Khadija Ahmed, The Report.
Well, joining me in the studio to discuss all this is the man at the centre of this controversy, Dr. Salman Butt of Islam 21C, and he's joined by Ibrahim Mahood from Cage. And we're on the line. We're joined by Jangahir Mohammed, Director of the Centre for Muslim Affairs. Welcome to the programme, all of you. Dr. Butt, first of all, let's just nail down the specifics here. The Henry Jackson Society, which is a far-right think tank, reported to the government words which it suggested to them and contradictory to British values, and the government issued a press release on that basis. Have I got that right?
Well, I believe so. I mean, there have been some reports in the media looking at the shocking similarity between reports released by this right-wing organisation and the government press release, and some parts are just copied and pasted.
And what is it specifically that you're supposed to have said which is falling outside the parameters of British values according to the government?
Well, to be blunt, I don't know. And this is part of the reason why we're taking forward this case. You know, at the moment, it seems the Home Secretary has powers to arbitrarily silence people or smear them with this accusation without them actually knowing why they've been labelling it.
So there's nothing in the government release which says Dr. Salman has said X, Y and Z and this is incompatible with British values because of A, B and C? So there's no argument whatsoever?
Not in the initial press release. What happened was, when I saw my name on the press release, I went to speak to my local MP, Fiona McTaggart, and she suggested that she write a letter to the Home Office asking, you know, for further clarification. Then, a few months later, they responded with a list of accusations, really, and it seemed as though they had gone through my articles, my social media life, and so forth, and tried to justify after the fact this label of extremism. And the only thing which was true on that list was that I had shared a platform with Cage about two years earlier.
Well, you're doing that now. So, Ibrahim Mahmood from Cage, let me just talk to you about this. I mean, whatever else happens now with this case going forward, in a way, it's already served a purpose in that it's exposed the way in which the government constructs this kind of argument in alliance with think tanks, which many people would say fall outside the normal remit of politics in this country.
Exactly, and it seems quite concerning. There's this overlap, watching more than overlap, that you have an external organisation that is very, very controversial with its links on the world and all the rest of it in particular. And on the one hand, that is directly influencing government policy and is arbitrarily. This is a key point here. There's no process whatsoever. There's no recourse. If I felt that you'd wronged me, John, or had Salman had said something out of the blue, surely he should have challenged that. He can't. So that's the whole problem, this label of extremism, that you can't even challenge this issue. And I think what Salman's done here is quite a noble deed in the sense that he's put the government, hold the government to account, actually surprised them. I think they didn't see us coming. They thought it was just, you know, this is one of those things that the government will do and get away with it without no accountability and no transparency as to how it comes to this conclusion. So I think that's the key thing here. What is the process? How do they determine this? And frankly, how do you even understand this word extremist? And this is the key problem here. The government set up this so-called unit, this extremism analysis unit, that, like Dr. Salman mentioned very eloquently, that it seems to have copy and pasted large chunks of the thinking, the writings, and also the understanding of what Henry Jackson Society feels about certain individuals, certain organisations. And I think that's the key revelation here.
Jahangir, if this drags the Henry Jackson Society out into the light of day, it will have served an important purpose just in doing that, won't it?
I think so, but I think we shouldn't just focus on the Henry Jackson Society. I think the real importance of this case is that for the first time what we're seeing is a challenge to the very notion of extremism and the prevent policy which enshrines that. And what we've had for the last 5 or 6 years, and particularly the last year or so when we've had this prevent duty, is lots of people, including children, being judged on the basis of something that we don't know, on a term that is not legally defined, added to another term which is not legally defined called British values. And on the basis of that, lots of judgments are being made about the Muslim community which have serious detrimental effects on their day-to-day life. Even, for example, I'm dealing at the moment and looking at a case where somebody's children have been taken away on the basis that this man has extremist ideas. And really what we need to find out is that, what does this mean? What is extremism? What are British values? What is it that the government is saying is unlawful? Is it a criminal offence? Is it a civil offence? To me, these are political crimes, most of them. And if the government is saying there are certain behaviours and political ideas, religious ideas, which we do not accept, then it is right for society to know what they are, so people can avoid those.
Okay, let me take some of those questions up here in the studio. Dr. Butt, were you encouraged to take this action by the fact that Imam Salman Ghani actually managed to get prominent Tories, Michael Fallon and others, to apologise for, I guess, similar remarks that were made about him? I mean, they got kind of caught in the open on the media and were subject, therefore, to the libel laws in the way that David Cameron, when he first made the points in the Commons, wasn't. So do you think there's now an environment emerging where perhaps members of the Muslim community are more willing to challenge this?
Well, I hope so. I mean, with respect to our case, we started it months ago, so that was before Sheikh Salman Ghani's case. But I was clear from the get-go that a victory in my eyes wouldn't be just to get the government to apologise or to say, OK, this person is an extremist, full stop. But what I wanted to do with this case was actually force the decision-making process into the light of day and into the scrutiny of the courts. Because if my name is cleared, then what's them to stop, smearing somebody else on similar fallacious grounds?
And the judge's decision to let this go forward, do you read that as the court saying, yes, the government does have to actually engage in a process of definition and justifying its actions?
I hope so. I mean, far be it for me to try and discuss, or imagine what's going through the mind of the judge, but I think any reasonable person of sound mind and who enjoys the freedom, enjoys the liberty that we have here, does not want to see a society where the government can arbitrarily silence people and do so without much oversight or transparency.
Ibrahim, the Salman Ghani case, this case, do you expect there to be more coming down the pike now?
Well, I think our case, for example, with regards to the Charity Commission, was the first judicial review of its kind. I think something similar is happening here with Dr. Butt's case. I think it's quite. I think there's that awareness now that clearly that is the way forward. That you need to be able to hold people to account legally, because clearly there's no political will amongst the establishment or the parties combined. And it seems it's up to individuals, unfortunately, to go out and have this judicial review. And I think that's actually quite encouraging. Now, Dr. Butt felt the need that he can go forward, and I think the fact that judges accepted that there's a case to be heard is quite crucial. So he must acknowledge in some shape or form that there is an issue here that needs to be determined. But I think moving forward, I think what's really fundamental about his case as well, on the prevent duty in particular, is about reasserting these principles and values that we've always held: the freedom of assembly, the freedom of association, in the Education Act in particular, with regards to universities, the context of how this statement, press release, came out in the first place. The Education Act has it enshrined. Ironically, it was the Conservatives that enshrined that because of students constantly demonstrating against them whenever they tried to show up and speak in the early 80s. That freedom of speech. So I think that's the whole point. We should be asserting these freedoms that already exist and arguing that really the prevent duty is in contradiction to a number of statutes that already exist already.
Next step?
Well, there's going to be a hearing for oral arguments in the coming months after the recess. And, yeah, we're just waiting for that, really. I think now it's just the...
And what happens at the end of this process? There's a hearing about all arguments. Then what happens? The judge decides. Who's actually in charge of the court proceedings at this point?
Well, the judge, as I understand it, I'm not a legal expert, the judge decides whether, on those charges that were mentioned in the video, whether the government acted lawfully or not. And based on his decision then, there will be, various declarations of lawfulness or unlawfulness, or appeals and so on and so forth.
Jahangir, Ibrahim was mentioning the Cage case with the Charity Commission. I've mentioned the Salman Ghani case. There's now another case. Do you expect this to kind of snowball to the point where perhaps some parts of the government legislation simply become unworkable because they won't stand up in the courts?
Well, I think, first of all, congratulations to Salman for taking it up. We also have the Shakil Beg case against the BBC, which is coming up on extremism as well.
Just tell us a little bit about that.
Well, he was labelled an extremist, and he's challenging the BBC and the whole definition of extremism, and even the understanding of jihad. The fact is, at the moment, you have a lot of people about Muslims on issues that they have little understanding. So this is an important thing. You see, we're in a McCarthyite era where Muslims are being judged in a way in which communists were during the McCarthyite period. And anybody knows the history of that. We saw the trials during the McCarthyite era, and they were important. Not many of them didn't succeed, but what they did succeed in doing was open up the sheer absurdity of the processes, the lack of process, the charges that were being held against people, and it led to a change in public opinion and to prominent people standing up and saying, well, no, we don't accept this. So I think whether the case wins or not, these type of cases are important in opening up an area of debate. We've not even had a debate in Parliament where the laws have been passed which defines what extremism is or what British values are. So how can you then expect universities and courts and terrorism trials to, in terrorism trials, people are being judged on extremism now, not necessarily terrorism. So if these things are criminal, if these things are offensive, there are certain political ideas which is not acceptable to discuss, we need to define them. Parliament needs to define them.
Okay.
And they need to be enshrined in law so they can be challenged.
Okay.
Just
let me take up some of those points in the studio. Salman, Theresa May, now Prime Minister, been in charge of the whole Prevent scheme for the last 5 years as Home Secretary. Do you think that this is now a crucial moment politically where if there isn't the kind of action that you and others have been taking, the government is likely to make a significant step forward in institutionalising and further pushing forward this agenda?
Well, it's been, I think, in the order of years now that or over a year now that the government has been revealing bits and pieces of new legislation that they're trying to come out with soon, in terms of disrupting the movements of so-called extremists and taking away passports and this new counter-extremism bill. So we see that due to the immense pressure being put on by the public, by academics, by unions, by students, it's getting more and more difficult for the government to prop up this failing strategy that is the Prevent duty.
Okay. That's Dr. Salman Butt, Abraham Mohammed from Cage, and Jahangir Mohammed. Thanks very much for joining us. I'm afraid that's all we've got time for on this part of the programme. Do join us for the second part of the show. We'll be looking at the latest damning report by Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch on government policy in Australia towards asylum seekers. Don't go away.